It is finally here. The NASCAR offseason isn't like that long, so it's kind of weird to say finally, but it still feels like it's been a long time since we had some on-track racing here with points on the line. We're going to get that on Sunday with the 2021 Daytona 500, and it's a good race always, but I think it's especially good this year because there are a lot of good process-oriented plays for NASCAR DFS guys who are not going to force us to deviate too much from our overall strategy and can allow us to feel pretty good about our lineups. Today, we're going to go through what that strategy is, what that process is, and which drivers fit that based on the rules and the salaries at FanDuel. Welcome on into the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by numberFire. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire, here to break down the Daytona 500 from a DFS perspective over on FanDuel. Lock is at 2:30 p.m. on Sunday, and you have all the information you need to fill out lineups for Sunday's race. There will be practice sessions, so potentially some guys going to backup cars. We'll see some speed, but you have all the info you need to fill out lineups for Sunday's race. If you want to, while you're listening along, you can open up a lineup over on FanDuel and fill out as we go. We'll go through strategy first and then a tier-by-tier breakdown based on the salaries over on FanDuel. In addition to the Heat Check for today, we also have a Q&A show coming up later today on the FanDuel YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Periscope pages. So if you want to tune in, ask questions about betting or DFS, make sure you are subscribed on your platform of choice just by searching for FanDuel. It's FanDuel Videos over on FanDuel Video or FanDuel Videos. Regardless, over on the FanDuel YouTube page, you can check it out over there, 3:30 p.m. Eastern. Dive on in, ask your questions, and we'll get you set for Daytona on Sunday, 3:30 p.m. Eastern on Friday. For that, you can also watch it after the fact on those same channels. Racing season is finally here, folks, and there's no better place to bet on the action than on FanDuel. FanDuel is offering a special promotion for the big race. Place a pre-race wager on a driver to win, even if he loses. If he comes inside the top 5, FanDuel will refund your bet. Betting your favorite driver to win and placing top 5 means you'll at least get your money back. And of course, they could win as well. The Daytona 500 is coming up on Sunday, so place your bets today over at the FanDuel Sportsbook app. Must be 21 plus and present in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Illinois, West Virginia, Indiana, Colorado, Tennessee, Iowa, Virginia, or Michigan. Refund issued as a non-withdrawable site credit. Max refund $50. Terms apply. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In West Virginia, visit 1-800-GAMBLER.net. In Indiana, call 1-800-9-WITH-IT. In Colorado, call 1-800-522-4700. In Iowa, call 1-800-BETS-OFF. Let's start things off here with the overall strategy for this race. And if you've been playing DFS for a long time and playing DFS throughout speed weeks, the time you've been waiting for is finally here. We can finally stack the back. No longer are we stuck with small fields and short races. This time, we've got 40 drivers in the field. And both the anecdote and the data say you should stack the back for this Daytona 500. And anecdotally, the reasons here are obvious because there are not a ton of laps to be led. Passing is pretty easy here, meaning you don't necessarily have to start up front to lead laps. Not only do we not need to start guys at the front to get laps led because there aren't that many, but also it may not be the guys starting up front who wind up leading laps. So the biggest upside we have in the field is via getting place differential drivers starting further back. It's not all that hard to find those drivers because we have a lot of attrition in these races. 15 of the 40 drivers in last year's Daytona 500 failed to finish because of a crash. So you can get place differential points just by finding drivers who survive, who make it through the entire race. And if you start deep enough, that bakes in a floor for those drivers and also gives them a very easy path to upside. That's why we should want to do this. But the data also shows the value of this. We've had FanDuel contests for 2 Daytona 500s. Of the 10 drivers in the perfect lineups of those races, only one of them started higher than 20. That was Denny Hamlin, who started 10th and won the race. And we'll circle back to the win discussion there in just a second. But it was a bunch of dudes who started in the back half of the field who wound up making the perfect lineup. In that 5-race sample of Daytona 500s, 40 drivers have scored at least 60 FanDuel points. This is in the 5-race sample since they went to 40 driver fields. 40 of them have scored at least 60 FanDuel points. 70% of that 40 started in the back half of the field. 58% started 26th or lower, so the way back of the field, and 23% started inside the bottom 5 spots in the order. Those drivers have both the best upside and the best floor for this race. And there is a reason that this winds up playing out for sure, and it's the stuff we talked about earlier. So your general strategy for this race should be to load up on drivers starting further back. That's the baseline. That's your core. That's your cash game roster as well. The big exception is if you think a driver will win. If a driver wins a race, they're pretty likely to be in the perfect lineup no matter where they start. That leads us to playing what we call here on the podcast the assumption game. This is just for tournaments. For cash games, you stack the back. But the assumption game is where you fill out a lineup, you pick an assumed winner, regardless of where they are starting, and you plug them in. Then you stack the back for the other 4 spots. Let's say you, like me, think Joey Logano has a good shot to win this race. He's starting 9th, so doesn't fit the stack the back strategy. But if he wins, probably going to be in the perfect line. So what I do is I'd fill in Logano as my assumed winner and then take 4 other spots with drivers starting further back. They're not going to get the 43 points for a win if we assume Logano wins, but they can still pay off for DFS in other routes. So the assumed winner, you plug them in and then plug in 4 other drivers after that, starting further back and who fit our overall strategy for this race. Along with an assumed winner, another strategy for tournaments is stacking teams and manufacturers, because in the draft, you'll often see teammates and manufacturers work together to try to put themselves at the front of the pack. We saw that with the Fords in the first race last night, and it was successful. We saw the Toyotas try to work together in the second race, and the Fords work together at times too, but overall, we'll often see this work out at the Daytona 500. Back in August last year, 2 Hendrick cars were the top 2 drivers, and there were 2 in the perfect lineup. 4 Chevrolets were in the perfect lineup there. In last year's Daytona 500, 7 of the top 9 finishers were Fords. In the 2019 Daytona 500, 3 Joe Gibbs Racing drivers were in the perfect lineup. So it's a good strategy to stack teams and manufacturers, and I especially like it if your assumed winner is starting near the front. So if I go with Logano starting near the front as my assumed winner, that increases my desire to use Brad Keselowski, Matty Benedetto, Austin Cindric, guys starting further back who may benefit if Logano does wind up winning the race. So if these guys are going to win, they're probably going to get some help. So I would put some thought into which driver starting further back would benefit if your assumed winner does in fact win. But broadly, it's applicable beyond that too. Stacking teams, stacking manufacturers, and trying to see who will work the best together and may wind up wiggling their way into a perfect lineup. So to recap here, your overall strategy, your overall thought process here should be to stack the back, loading up on drivers starting further back who have that good place differential upside and a good floor and can finish well for this race. Make that your core, and you do want to live back there for cash games as well. For tournaments, you can pick an assumed winner, a driver starting closer to the front who you think can win this race. Pick them and then stack the back after that, and then consider stacking, pairing drivers on the same team or within the same manufacturer together, because if that team does wind up working well together, it could lead you to making it easier to predict who will finish well for that race. So that is the overall strategy for Sunday's race, and it's one that makes sense anecdotally, but is also paid off in terms of the past data. So with that overall strategy in mind, let's go tier by tier here and break down the best drivers on FanDuel for Sunday's race. Starting off with the top tier, that is Denny Hamlin at $14,000 through Brad Keselowski at $12,500. And Hamlin is the best play in the field once again. He started back in 25th because he ran out of fuel during his dual race last night. So he didn't finish well there, but he has won 2 straight Daytona 500s. He has won 3 total Daytona 500s, finished 3rd here in the summer race last year. He gets through these weird, terrible crashes. We saw it last night in the dual race. Like, he dropped back when he saw stuff was getting weird, avoided trouble, and worked his way back towards the front. That's what he does. He has this intuition where he can avoid those crashes, which gives him a high floor, but he also has the best ceiling because he can win this race, as he has shown many, many times. So I would say for cash games, you just lock in Hamlin. You go from there. He will be popular for tournaments. Sometimes, though, chalk is chalk for a reason, so I don't mind using him despite that fact. Just know he will be popular. That's not good enough to push me off, but I think that we should note that. So Hamlin, a lock for cash games. I still think he's a tremendous play for tournaments. Despite the popularity, he's going to be popular for a reason. The other guy starting further back here is Brad Keselowski. He is 12.5 and starting in 24th. he is another good driver like Hamlin with good teammates. There are 5 Penske or Penske affiliated cars in the field for this race. Now, Brad wrecks a lot here. He has failed to finish 6th the past 8 Daytona races. He's gotten wrecked from behind a lot while leading, which is interesting, partially because of blocking, but also just, bad luck. But Keselowski can win this race. He has the upside to win. So I'm going to put him second behind Hamlin within this top tier pretty easily. And Keselowski, another guy I would give strong consideration to in a cash game lineup. Among those starting at the front, I think it's a bit of a toss-up. My win sims like Joey Logano the most, but they are also high on Chase Elliott and Ryan Blaney. So I'd rotate through those guys. They're all viable as assumed winners here. I would rank Logano first, then Blaney, then Elliott, but all those guys well behind Keselowski and Hamlin, who are, I think, at least for me, staples for a cash game and core plays for tournaments. The second tier on FanDuel is Kevin Harvick at $12,000 through Eric Almirola at 9.5, and nobody in this tier is starting further back. The deepest starter is Kyle Larson starting back in 13th, so the second tier is an avoid for cash games. We can rank them for tournaments, but I'm going to be pretty thin on this tier overall. My favorite assumed winner in this tier will be Kyle Busch. He has never won the Daytona 500, and he's wrecked here a ton recently, but he's a Joe Gibbs Racing driver, so he stacks well with Hamlin and with Truex. He has won non-500s here in the past. He's a good Daytona racer, just has not won the Daytona 500. He can get the job done. He's starting 10th, so again, Busch is just for tournaments, but he is my favorite guy in this range. I'd say by a decent amount. Second would be Kevin Harvick, who is starting 8th. His record at Daytona is pretty underwhelming. He hasn't done a ton recently, but he's a Ford. He'll have good teammates at the front, good manufacturer teammates as well. He'll be fast. So I know it's not a ringing endorsement of Harvick, but I just don't think this range is very good, and I don't plan to be here all that often. So Busch and Harvick are my options as the assumed winner, but it's not a tier I want to be in too much just because everyone is starting close to the front, and it's not like there's anyone like Hamlin of his caliber in this tier either. The mid-range is a lot better. We got Martin Truex Jr. at $9,300 through Christopher Bell at $8,000, and we have some good place differential options here. All 4 of Truex, Kurt Busch, Ricky Stenhouse Jr. and Matty Benedetto are starting between 20th and 26th. So this is a really good range. It's a rock star range. The question is, how do we rank these guys? How do we prioritize them? I'm probably going to put Truex first. He is the one starting deepest in 26th. He has great teammates in the race because he is with Joe Gibbs Racing. His overall record at Daytona is not that good. He did finish 4th here last year. He was second behind Eric Jones in the summer 2018 race. He does stack well with Hamlin, so that works. I know I'm sounding a bit wishy-washy on Truex. It's more so I'm in on him because of the starting position in the team, more so than the driver himself, which is never super comfortable, but I think that's enough to put him at the top of this heap here. Second will be Ricky Stenhouse Jr. He's very volatile, so just kind of know what you're getting into here, but he is the guy in this range with the best win odds in my simulations. He also has great odds to wreck. They call him Wrecky for a reason, so that's a consideration. But that's true for everybody in this field. Anybody in this field can wreck no matter where they are running, and not everybody can win like Stenhouse can. So I think the Stenhouse deserves to be number 2 on this list, starting in 21st. I will go with Matty Benedetto third, just because I feel better about his affiliated teams. He is basically a Penske car, so he stacks well with Keselowski, Blaney, Logano, and Centric. He has 3 top 10s here, even while in largely bad equipment. He did not come through last year with Penske, and it's also clear he's not as good as guys like Logano, Keselowski, and Blaney, but he's starting 23rd. He's $8,200. I will have plenty of Benedetto for this race. Kurt Busch would be 4th in this range, but I think it's a range where I'm probably going to be pretty diversified here. All these guys can win, but they all also have really good crash odds, and that's a little concerning. So with 4 legitimately good options, I am okay diversifying, so I'm not going to fully commit to anyone here in the same way I'll commit to Hamlin at the top or even Keselowski near the top. So it's a good place to differentiate. If you get the sense that someone here will be outrageously popular, I'm okay being a little bit lower on them, deviating to the other options, because I think that the range of outcomes for all 4 of Truex, Busch, Stenhouse, and Benedetto pretty similar, and I do want to account for that within the way I build my lineups. The value tier also really good. It's Austin Dillon at $7,500 through Eric Jones at $6,000, and a couple more drivers starting at the back here, and I like a couple of them quite a bit. One of them who is a big salary saver is Austin Centric. He is $6,200 and starting 39th, so the place differential upside for him is as good as anybody in the field. His record here in the Xfinity Series is not great, but he was running well last night before he got caught speeding on pit road. He's teammates with Logano, Keselowski, Blaney, and effectively Benedetto. He's starting 39th. That's a big leg up for him. So I'll take the discount here on Centric for sure. And if I want to jam in both Keselowski and Hamlin, Centric does make that quite a bit easier, and he does so while fitting the process, starting back in 39. Another guy starting in the 30s is Ross Chastain. He's starting 34th and is $7,500. I don't know how I feel about Chastain for the full season because I think his equipment's not that great, and that does matter overall, but it matters a bit less here. And he's shown he can run well on this track. He got a top 10 in 2019 while driving for a really bad team from an equipment perspective, and he also won that same year in the Xfinity Series. So you can stack Chastain with his teammate Kurt Busch, who is starting higher in the order but still in the mid-range. Chastain starting 34th, $7,500. I'll definitely be there, even though for the full season he's not, one of my favorite options for sure. Chris Buescher not starting as deep, starting 22nd, but I think his upside's pretty good. He has the best win odds in my sims of anybody in this range, including, a guy like Austin Dillon, including a guy like Chastain, who we just talked about, has shorter odds on FanDuel Sportsbook. Buescher, though, just really good at this track type. He has 5 top 10s in his past 7 Daytona 500s. That includes 3 top 5 finishes, 2 of which came in 2018 when he was with a worse team than he has now. So Buescher starting 22nd. That's not as deep as the others, so I would not go here for cash games. But for tournaments, I think that Buescher is still a very good play for sure. Tyler Reddick is starting 29th. I have been in on him this entire week, and it has not paid off yet. Pretty bad in qualifying, pretty bad in the dual races. He had some issues at the Roval on Tuesday, but he's $7,000. He's starting deep. He has a good track record here in the Xfinity Series. He actually won here a couple years ago in the Xfinity Series. So if we're comparing him to guys like Chase Briscoe and Cole Custer, who are also pretty young and don't have super rich histories, I think that Reddick would be my favorite guy there. So I think all of Centric, Buescher, Reddick, and Chastain are really good options, and I want to be in this tier pretty often. Centric would probably be first for me because he's starting so deep. Then I go Chastain, Reddick, and Buescher, but it's a great race for value. We got value here and in the tier above this, so I think it's a good time to be high on this range, at least in salary on the table, just because a lot of the best process plays for this race are drivers with lower salaries. So I'm going to be okay leaving a lot of salary on the table. It'll make it easier to get to guys like Hamlin and Keselowski, but I also want to make sure that I'm not just getting 100% of those guys. And I think that the best process for this race will be to leave salary on the table pretty often for this one. The punting tier on FanDuel is Michael McDowell at $5,500 on down. With all the value in the range right above this, you might not need to come down here all that often, but there are some decent options here. My favorite is Kaz Gralla. He is $4,500, starting dead last, starting 40th. He's not super experienced at Daytona, but he has a pair of top 5s here in the Xfinity Series. He won here in the Truck Series back in 2017, so the talent is there. Colleague Racing is not a staple in the Cup Series, but they're one of the top teams in the Xfinity Series, and it sounds like they will be going Cup Series racing full-time next year. They've got other plans to run this year, too, with AJ Allmendinger next week, so I'd bet this equipment's not that bad. He's $4,500, starting 40th. I'm going to take some stabs on Kaz Gralla, and he is easily my favorite punt option for Sunday's race. Anthony Alfredo, another guy starting deep in the field. He's starting 36th and $4,500. I am very skeptical of the talent, but he has 2 teammates in this field. They've got speed in David Reagan and Michael McDowell. He's a good amount below Gralla for me, but he's least a consideration. I'll be living in the tier above this more so than this one, but in Gralla and Alfredo, you have considerations. I think that Gralla worth actively targeting, not just as a salary saver, but also just someone who could be a good play overall for Sunday's race. Okay, as always, we'll finish up here with picks to win for the Daytona 500. The way we do this on the podcast is one driver above $10,000 on FanDuel and one below it. Above $10,000, if we were going based on like betting odds, the guy I like most relative to his odds is Joey Logano, but It's not the format we have here. I'm just picking a winner, and based on my win sims, that is still Denny Hamlin as the guy most likely to win this race. So banking on a three-peat, pretty tough, but I think that with Denny Hamlin, he could do it for sure. So I'll go Denny Hamlin as my pick to win above $10,000. Below it, I wanted to go through my win sims and just look at the guy who had the best win odds below $10,000. And it was a bit surprising to me that that answer was Christopher Bell, but it makes sense because we've seen how well Joe Gibbs Racing can do here. He was really good in the dual races, so he has shown he can do that here as well. And I just think that the teammate narrative makes a lot of sense. That's why the model likes Bell, is because this team has been so good at Daytona in the past, and I don't have a lot of reasons to push back on that, especially with how well he ran in the dual race on Thursday night. So we're going to ride with Joe Gibbs Racing, which has not been a bad strategy here in the past by any means. Denny Hamlin above, Christopher Bell below as my picks to win for Sunday's race. Do not forget, we are back here once again, 3:30 p.m. Eastern on the FanDuel YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Periscope pages. If you have questions, if I didn't talk about someone you are curious about, whether it be for betting or for DFS, hit me up there, 3:30 p.m. Eastern on the FanDuel YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Periscope channels, answering your questions for a half hour there for betting and DFS to get you set for Daytona. You can, if I didn't talk about someone here and you're curious about them, or if there's someone who I dismissed who you disagree with, let me know. Talk to me there, 3:30 p.m. Eastern, FanDuel YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Periscope channels. A lot of other good stuff here on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed as well. Austin Swain broke down UFC 258. That is coming up, I believe, on Saturday. That podcast already posted. Tom Vecchio, as always, has you covered with NBA and NHL content every weekday here on the feed. And also, Brandon Gadula and I are doing weekly PGA podcasts every Tuesday, and the NASCAR podcast back in the rotation once again next week. If you have questions for me before the 3:30 p.m. stream, I am on Twitter at Jim Sannes, JimSannes. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast. Big thank you to Calvin Theobald, our video producer, for running the video side of things here today. Thank you, Cal, as always. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. Good luck to you for the Daytona 500, both for betting and for DFS. Looking forward to talking to you again later today, and then once again next week. This has been the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by numberFire.